followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joses, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they were offended at him. But Yahusha said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country, among his own relatives, and in his own house." Now he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit, teaching. And he called the 12 to him and began to send them out two by two, and gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals, and not to put on 2 tunics. Also he said to them, "In whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. And whoever will not receive you." I'm sorry, the way my page is printed, it's making it hard for me to read it. Just a second. "And whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than that city." So they went out and preached that people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Now King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known. And he said, "John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." Others said, "It is Elijah." And others said, "It is the prophet, or one like one of the prophets." But when Herod heard, he said, "This is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead." For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. For John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and Kodesh man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Then an opportune day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in, she danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you." He also swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half of my kingdom." So she went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." Immediately she came in with haste to the king and asked, saying, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. And immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. Then the apostles gathered to Yahusha and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitudes saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Yahusha, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep, not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. And when the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And then they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples and set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side of Bethsaida, where he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through the whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the border of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Did you want me to keep reading?
I think that's it, sis. That was great. So I thought there was some interesting connections here from the earlier readings we had today, especially verse 26, because of the oath that he swore. So it shows you, and you see this even in the Tanakh time period. Mm-hmm. There were times where they swore an oath, and then the guy instantly regrets swearing an oath. Like the guy in Judges, he swears to Yahuwah, gives a verbal oath to the Father, The next person that walks through the threshold of my home, I'm going to give you as a burnt offering. His only daughter walks in. So there's many times where we kind of have like our little dumb moments and we make these stupid oaths. And unfortunately, the king, I think, was a little bit seduced by this harlot, wife of his brother, that got him to promise John the Baptist to her. Mind you, he's not, according to Torah, he shouldn't be with her or be married to her because she's married to his brother who is alive. Mm-hmm. So he's actually committing adultery also, King Herod. So I found that kind of interesting. So I'm trying to see what else spoke to me in this. So you got that. My kingdom. He was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. So it's interesting too that they thought that Yahusha was John resurrected. Mm-hmm. I guess they I don't know, that's kind of weird to me. You would think that people realize they're two different people, but I guess whoever Herod was talking to didn't realize that John the Immerser, John the Baptist, was not the same person as Yahusha. Trying to think, anything else stood out to me. I thought it was interesting. Early in the chapter, it mentions that they were astonished that Yahusha taught the way he taught, without being learned in a school or anything. Because what you got to understand is that in those time periods, for you to be teaching like that, you had to go to these rabbinical schools. You had to be learned under guys like Gamliel and all that stuff. You couldn't be just a common folk and be a teacher back then. So for Yahusha to do that, he never went to a school to learn the Torah, anything. He just knew it automatically. And it says right here in verse 2, it says, they were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Because they're seeing all the stuff Yahusha's doing and how he knows the prophecies so accurately, and they're like, oh my goodness, this guy hasn't even gone to a rabbinical school. How does he know all this? Because back then, that's how it was. In the Talmudic time period, early Talmudic time period, you had to be studied under a rabbi to be teaching. That's just the way it was back in Israel. They had these stupid schools and stuff like that even the Targums sometimes reference in their commentaries, or commentaries, I should say. So there definitely historically, it was very interesting that Yahusha comes on the scene, basically the anti-rabbi. I know a lot of people think that he would have, because he never says anything when they call him rabbi. I can trust you, Yahusha never wanted anyone to call him rabbi. Mm-hmm. He even says it, I think in one of the Besorah accounts, he says, call no man rabbi. Yeah. So he never ever wanted to be called rabbi. They did it because it was already in their culture. It was, you got to understand the culture of post-Babylon, Hebrews and the Yahudim of that time were very, very influenced by Babylon. They started learning things and started melding stuff with the religion of the Tanakh. There's even been books written by researchers called The Transformation of the Belief of the Tanakh into Rabbinical Judaism. And most secular researchers today know there's a distinction between the two, that they're not the same thing. It's not the same belief system that the early Hebrews had. So it's very interesting that Yahusha never refers to himself as you could say, yeah, he calls them their master, but yeah, like the Greek word for master is a little bit different than the word rabbi. So I'm just saying the like translators kind of confuse that by putting rabbi there. It's a Greek word being used there, so I doubt the word is really rabbi there. So, but anyway, so I just find it interesting that they're just shocked because he hasn't been learned by under anyone, and he knows all this. So go ahead, brother Joshua. Let's see here.
When in the very last verse, and also like there's lots of other verses, but where they say if we can just touch the border of his garment, or people were touching the border of his garment, well, obviously we know that's his tzitzit. However, and you don't see this in the Greek, but you do see it in the Hebrew. And I double checked. I went to the LXX Hebrew to Greek just to double check it, because I know a lot of the times at least the Masoretic Hebrew can be jacked up, but I just double checked it to make sure that was the word. So the word being used in this case where it says they touched the border of his garment and they were healed. The word for border in the Greek in Mark, it's kraspedon, but you run that through the Hebrew or the Greek to Hebrew, it's kanaf, but it can also be tzitzit. So it's the kanaf is the border in Hebrew, and then the tzitzit where the borders go. But what's interesting about that word kanaf, which is used for the four borders of the four corners, where the tzitzit go, is also the word used in Malachi 4, where it says the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings, or should probably read the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his borders, or healing in his the edges of his garment.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, that connection there. So that's Malachi 4. The word for fringe should actually be there. That's interesting. That's yeah. I mean, most modern translators actually fix the word hem to fringe. Actually, in the word you're talking about here, even the ESV has fringe of his garment. So most of them even understand. Even I'm surprised that evangelical Christian translator would put fringe here, because that would be promoting wearing tzitzis. I'm kind of shocked. But yeah, that makes a lot more sense, that it's touching his actual tzitzit or his fringe or his tassel. By the way, just to add to Brother Joshua's point, that word the word for tassel or fringe is used in the Septuagint universally for tzitzit. So that's how we know for a fact it's talking about that too. You can track the word kraspedon back to the LXX. It's used in, I believe, Numbers 15. Every time the tzitzis are talked about, the Greek word kraspedon is used. So there, for a fact, Yahushua was actually keeping Torah. He was wearing tzitzis on the four corners of his garment. That's what the woman touched for her to be made well, even in that other situation where she had a issue of blood. Okay, so the majority of the time, kraspedon should be translated as fringe or tassel in English. It should always be translated as that. Other translators try to say it's hem, just the edge of his garment, just the hem, the hem of your shirt or whatever. But in their culture, they're touching the edge of your garment included your tzitzit, because your tzitzis were supposed to be on the edges of your garments. So by default, she would have touched his fringe. So yeah. All right. So I think that's about the end for today's study. So I do think I got a couple of ideas that we're probably going to do studies for in the future, just FYI for new subscribers and listeners. I think a good study to be doing in the future is because we get a lot of visitors, and they want to know why do we keep the Old Testament laws and like that. So it might be a good topical study sometime in the future, just FYI, why we do these things, why we wear tassels. I mean, that verse should tell you alone why we wear tassels. The fact that our Messiah says, I'm your example, do as I do. Paul wore tassels, follow me, I'm an imitator of Messiah. I mean, that's just one of the many examples why we do the things we do, because the disciples and Yahushua himself were doing these things, and we are supposed to do as Yahushua did and follow Paul because he's a follower of Messiah. So those are things that were commandments of the Father that were always kept by his people, that they never stopped keeping them until, Rome came along and wanted to make Christianity their state religion and then screwed everything up. But so anyway, but I think it would be a good idea to do a study in the future for all of our listeners that are on YouTube all the time and on other platforms I put these videos on, just to get understanding why we do these things, why we think it's important to keep the Torah as believers in the Messiah. And I mean, other than the obvious reason that we believe and follow the whole Bible, not just the New Testament. But anyway, so please stay tuned to that one. I think it will be a good one for those that are not in this walk to understand why it's important to keep the Father's commandments and that they have not been done away with. So please stay tuned, everyone. Have a great rest of your Sabbath to all of our brothers and sisters in Yahuwah Almighty and Yahushua Messiah. Shabbat Shalom.